Les questions de la salle, questions from the room.
Corée, j'ai une réflexion.
I have one observation. We're seeking to reinforce dialogue between Europe and Asia. What about the dialogue with the new Trump administration? You have the issue of the NATO, you have the issue of security, North Korea, etc. Dialogue between Europeans and Asians is necessary. When we started the LASEM mechanism, different mechanisms were launched. However, you spoke about the problem of Ukraine. We have a lot of problems. We need the opinion of Europe. And we have to reinforce dialogue between Europe and Asia. There is India, Pakistan, China, Japan, and the Asian. Some fear the rise of China. I think more dialogue is needed with China. Thank you. We will take a few more interventions before we reply.
I am Ambassador Khalid Mansouri, the newly appointed ambassador to France. Last week I used to be the Director of Europe in the Foreign Office, so I would like to talk a little bit about the new phenomena which has happened after the election of Mr. Trump and the legitimization of xenophobia, the legitimization of hatred which came across the media and the political elite in the West and especially in Europe. Next year, I call it the election year. We have the Brexit. In March, we have the Austrian election. In April and May, by June, we have the French election. And in October, November, we have the German election. So what kind of messages that we should give to delegitimize these kind of messages, especially coming through what I call it the cheap politics of some of the politicians in Europe and the mass media, which is practicing their ill messages in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Because we are polite and Mr. Trump has been elected president, we are going to forget a little bit that the way he behaves is totally contradictory to our values. But you're right to remind us. There was a question there, and then there. Yeah.
Oui, merci, Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Middle East is a bloodland. When we fight in the name of God, war does not end and can only be ended through a compromise and a political solution. In Lebanon, for 2.5 years there was no president because two main communities the Shia and the Sunni communities who could not reach an agreement over a president. Finally, we were able to get a president out of a compromise and an accord, an agreement of the two sponsors of the two communities, Iran and Saudi Arabia. This compromise is the result of a political accord and may extend to the whole region. Because the issue may not take place unless it was through a political accord where the two communities respect one another, and in this agreement there could be a sharing of zones of influence with the promise not to interfere in the other zone. This is the best proof of the political agreement that happened in Lebanon and that may extend to the region.
So first, I would like to thank the whole panel for this beneficial information. I'm Rufaida Azam, a student in international affairs. So my question is for Ambassador Manuel. You said that there should be a military solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but actually, you didn't say so? Really? Sorry?
I said there is no military solution to this conflict.
Okay, so there is no military solution to this conflict, but what kind of solution could be attained if, like, as you said, there has been a 60 years of negotiations between two parties, and there is exactly zero results from this negotiation, except for the deterioration of the space of Palestinian in the Palestinian territory. So what kind of solution should be attained for this conflict? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So who on the panel wants to address the first 3 or 4 questions? Yeah?
As long as you have, in this conflict, it's very difficult because you have two legitimacies opposing each other. The Palestinians have a legitimacy because they said, okay, it's our land. We've been living there for 500 years or more, and we should not pay for the fact that the Germans killed the Jews in Europe. This is unfair. And the Israeli answers, yeah, but this state of Israel, we built it. In Tel Aviv, before we came, there was nothing. So you have two legitimacies. The only way that can change is when the Israeli will understand that they cannot achieve at the same time the 3 goals that were given to Zionists by Theodor Herzl, which is a Jewish state, a democratic state, and a state on the region, the old Ottoman region of Palestine, the Mandate Palestine. These 3 goals cannot be attained together. And as long as the Israelis will not understand that, Ariel Sharon, before dying, understood it. Tzipi Livni understood it. But currently, the Israeli leadership does not understand that, and the solution is delayed. Nobody is ready to press Israel, and I think personally it's a suicidal policy by Israel, long-term suicidal policy, but for the time being, I do not see in Israeli politics people ready to go to a real two-state solution, which means giving the Palestinians a viable state. I don't see that. I think that in 10 years' time, unfortunately, we'll be at the same situation.
Michel Fouché wants to say a few words, and then after that, Mr.
Je
Assassin.
crois que ce qui a été indiqué, monsieur, sur le Liban est en effet
What was mentioned about Lebanon is very interesting in its specificity. I met last week in Tehran people who follow the same thinking. They are not the majority. There's an Iranian proverb whereby you say, you need tomorrow in order to clap.
There will never be a military solution to this conflict. The Palestinians have went through a process of armed struggle for almost 30 years. And they came to the conclusion in 1988 that political accommodation is the only way out towards resolving this conflict. We have accepted the state of Israel by de facto, and we have imposed the Palestinian statehood as a de facto on the other side if there will be peace and stability in the region. Now, Israel has won 5 major wars in the Middle East. I ask you a question, and I challenge you. Did it bring security to its own individuals? It never did. Okay. The Palestinians have struggled so far by using all kinds of military tactics, and they have proven to be futile, right? Now, the international community has accepted the idea of a two-state solution where we, the Palestinians, had made our painful historic concession when we have accepted the state of Israel over 78% of Palestine, our homeland, and we have accepted to have that state on 22%. Israel does not want even to share the idea of a two-state, but wants to control also the West Bank in the context of their messianic Zionist dream of Eretz Israel, which means that there will never be a contiguous geographic entity for a Palestinian state when you have 3 major clusters of settlements separate the entire West Bank, let alone the E1 envelope separates Jerusalem from the West Bank, and Gaza, which is totally separated, by a corridor that Israel controls. Then Israel talks about peace and a two-state solution. And that's why in my deliberation, I said we have reached a point of no return. The two-state solution is dead, ladies and gentlemen. It's a two-state delusion. What are the other alternatives? There is no military solution. There is a weak and one-sided third party that should be changed. There should be more aggression by the international community to impose BDS on Israel. And that's the only way Israel understands. If you hit its pocket, its economy, then they will succumb to the fact and come to an agreement. One simple example I can give you. In 1991, when President Bush, the father, I'm finishing. When President Bush, the father, said in the Madrid peace process, we want peace and stability in the region, and asked then Prime Minister Shamir to join. He refused to come to Madrid for the simple fact, he says, I don't want to look at the Palestinians as a partner, to us. But when he used the 10 billion loan guarantees as a pressure, Shamir went basically to Madrid. So there are ways of trying to put Israel in its prior context, but not, assuming that this conflict will go forever, because the outcome of this is going to be bloody hell.
Okay, thank you. There is a question here. There was another one somewhere. Yeah.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you. This is the final debate after 3 days of interesting discussions.
can't we try to come up with 3 deep questions? I would like to share with you a question that concerns me, and let me or help me solve it. And another one is kind of like a rapprochement. Globalization has led to global geopolitical models, and those who initiated that and the rapprochement of forces at the economic and social level and in line with the security alliances led to also free trade zones or spaces. If those people who pioneered this idea are now questioning the TTP, and that some models of the development and globalization might be also questioned, right? This is one. Also, that all superpowers have been based on certain innovation in terms of technology. Research centers are asking whether it is time or that they should change their idea. Our Japanese friends over the last 2 years have revisited many of their questions in terms of invention. So let's say that global forces have now started addressing or touching on impurities and injustice, and in the scientific and in science there are ethical questions that are being raised. Are we talking here about ideas that will change our globalized thoughts? This is a very important question. The idea between science and social ethics is legitimate. We have started late with this panel, so please let's not take any longer. We will take one last question. Thank you. I did not understand the argumentation of the representative or the correspondent of the Figaro that and I am asking about the question or the legitimacy that you have mentioned. What would you do with the people when they made their choice to elect their president, and who would intervene in order to remove from power a person? I will answer you. I believe that the UK, France, that the respect of the United Nations is something that I did not mention. Since the Iraqi failure, for me, this is the reaction that took place later on is acceptable. When I mentioned about the rules by the Western world, and when systems are being built, they have to be respected. It's true that there are some failures, but the qualities take over, and it's very important to respect them. Of course, George W. Bush did not respect the international order in 2003 in Iraq. There will always be interventions, humanitarian interventions, since or due to the role of the media in this respect. I do agree with you, sir, that the West is in contradiction since after the Second World War, the West decided to stop managing the world or running the world, and to leave countries in India or in other countries govern themselves. So we see here the return of colonization. For instance, in 1956, colonialist powers have left the Sudan, and now they are intervening in another different way, and the same applies to Syria, to Libya. So if you consider that it is important to remove from power Saddam Hussein or Bashar al-Assad or Gaddafi, who shall you replace them with? We see, instance, in Libya, the emergence of some different groups. We need to conclude, sir. At the same time, it is important to protect civilians. Jean Cabre made his comments, and I agree the validity of your question. And I believe that the West should think twice before intervening outside their borders in other countries, since they are in contradiction towards themselves, as they have reneged on colonization after the Second World War II. We shall conclude this debate, and I believe we could all thank the panelists who gave us different opinions on the question of global governance, and I will leave it to Thierry de Montbrial to conclude this conference.